everyone, I'm Melissa McAllister, and you're listening to The Melissa Made Show. Now, for decades, I've dedicated myself to helping women break the cycle of dieting, navigate through all the fads, and change their lives through my nutrition coaching. Now, each week, I'm going to talk about everything from deep nutrition, mindset, self-care, the ideal workout routine, tips on how and why to implement intermittent fasting in your life, my favorite recipes that are not only crowd pleasers, but they're actually healthy for you, and so much more. Now, with small and consistent changes, you can defy aging while living a happier, healthier, and more heart-filled life. I'm so excited to show you it's possible with the right strategies that are so simple to adopt. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Melissa Made Show. And I have a guest today that I am just stoked about, because when I open my Instagram account and I get questions from you guys, every single question, I'm telling you, probably 90% of the questions I get are this guest's expertise. So I really want you to pull out a piece of paper, take your notes, or listen to it once, knowing that you're going to have to listen to this episode twice in order to get all the information that she's going to share. She's quite the wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate her honing in on her expertise and being able to share with you a lot about the female body, hormones, metabolism. If you've got fitness on the brain and you want to maximize your fitness, she's your girl. Now, for those of you, I think the 5 people that watched the video, actually, you'll see on my Instagram, you'll see I got a door behind me. So the episode that came out today, my solo podcast, I actually shared that eventually there's going to be a time that I have to do a podcast in Mexico. It's today. And so I shared with Lauren, my guest today, I said, I know it's weird, I'm standing in front of a door, but I think my sound is best in here. And you guys know Mick, my husband, he's just not someone I can rely on to be quiet. He doesn't know how to be quiet. So I feel safe here so that Lauren and I can have a great conversation without any interruptions. So I'm going to give her an introduction. And I told her before this, I said, this is not a real quick introduction because you guys, she's a wealth of knowledge. And so I really want you to understand who we have the opportunity to listen to today. So buckle your seatbelts and listen to this introduction, and then we're going to get right into the podcast. Okay. So Lauren Papanos is a registered integrative dietitian, certified specialist in sports dietetics, and published hormone health researcher. She is here to discuss the critical connection between metabolism and optimal hormonal health on the Melissa Made Show. Now, as a lifetime gymnast, top-tier college cheerleader, and she totally looks like one, she's gorgeous, you guys, and all-around high-achieving woman, Lauren knows that it's what it's like to do all the wellness things, amen to that, while struggling with cystic acne, inexplicable fatigue, hormonal weight gain, and ongoing stomach issues. After spending years bouncing between Western doctors and integrative practitioners, she became a registered dietitian so she could provide women with the research-backed, yet empathetic and holistic support that she was looking for all along. How cool is that? Lauren now runs Functional Fueling Nutrition, a San Diego-based and virtual private nutrition coaching practice where she has helped countless of high-level executives, creative entrepreneurs, and Olympic athletes to decipher the real data on their hormonal and implement tangible lifestyle shifts so that they can go from that frustrated to high functioning. She's empowered with a master's degree in integrative nutrition and more than 10 advanced educational trainings on hormone health and root cause medicine. Lauren cuts through the wellness influencer noise and makes data-driven information digestible so that you can see what's actually going on in your body and understand how to heal it. So I love in that introduction, you noticed a couple of times science-backed is so important, as you guys know, for me. And so I want to welcome you, Miss Lauren, to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
You bet. So I first want to start this off with the big buzzword I feel like right now with all that's going on with people really, especially this time of year, and things like, these new miracle drugs that have come out. Everybody is always, Jerry used the word obsessed with losing weight and having a nice, healthy metabolism. If you would kind of share with us how having that healthy metabolism, what it means to you to have a healthy metabolism, how that also affects your hormones and how those two can be interlinked together.
Yeah, metabolism is such a buzzword, right? But it actually is a scientific term that essentially just means how we're able to take the food or the calories that we eat and actually turn it into energy. And there's a lot of components that go into play with that. Not only do we know that hormones play a big impact, we also know that there's microbes in our gut that also help us metabolize the food that we eat too. And so whenever we're talking about metabolism, I always like to think about, not just hormones, but also digestive system and how all of these things are impacting us and how that's ultimately impacting our metabolism. So it's a big fancy term, but really underneath metabolism, there's hormones that are impacting it, there's digestive processes that are impacting it, and then even things like health history. What does your history look like with how you've eaten in the past or how you've exercised in the past, because all those things are going to impact how you metabolically function.
I love that. So when somebody, I'll give you an example. So I wanted to go, I'd love to learn, as I know you do as well. And so I was debating between a course on gut healing and a course on hormone health. And I really struggled with choosing which one to do first. I'd really like to do both, but I was like, gosh, which one should I do first? I surveyed my social media, and the majority of people actually said hormones. They were like, we want you to learn more about hormones because we think we have hormone issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to my other school and I talked with one of the professors there, and I'm like, well, what do you think? And she said, I really think you should start with the gut healing because gut health has so much to do with, how your hormones function. I would love your opinion on that. When somebody comes to you, and maybe they do this a lot, but they do it with me, it's always, they tend to blame the hormones first. Like, my hormones are out of whack. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that there's usually something else first that needs to be, looked at or taken care of before you look at the hormones?
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of functional and integrative medicine is that we look at the body as one whole joint system, right? So we're always trying to understand is how the gut impacts the hormones and how the hormones impact the immune system and how that impacts the brain and so many other functions, right? So it's all intertwined. But I typically, when I'm working with someone, I will do testing for both at the same time, but I'm using the initial hormone testing more as a starting point of, okay, how much are things imbalanced? Where is the imbalance coming from? And then I'm using the gut and the information we're gathering from that to really be able to guide a lot of the treatment. Of course, sometimes there's more factors that go into it than just the gut, but I'm using the gut to really be able to guide treatment, because the way that I see hormone healing or hormone balancing happen is that we don't need pharmaceuticals. We don't need hormone replacement therapy if we're still in those reproductive years where we're making hormones, right? If we're just talking about sex hormones, for example. Instead, we need to gather the information to understand why are the hormones imbalanced. And if we can understand the why, and then we can fix that, which a lot of times comes from the gut, then the hormones will essentially rebalance themselves. And that's really what we want to happen, is we want the hormones to balance themselves. But we can't do that if we don't actually dive deep and understand why the hormones are imbalanced in the first place.
I love that. So you kind of touched on the word testing. Can you share with the audience what kind of testing you would suggest for both gut health and for hormone balancing, what they should be looking for when it comes to finding some answers if they're a little bit lost?
Yeah. So of course, it will depend on what someone's symptoms are and their history of things. But say that they're really trying to understand, or maybe we see symptoms that are happening within reproductive hormones. So hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, then it would be helpful for us to be able to do some testing of those hormones and their metabolites. So when we're doing something through urine, for example, a lot of times I'll use something called a Dutch test. And that's a urine testing method where we're able to test for estrogen and how estrogen is getting out of the body, so how it's metabolizing. We can also look at adrenal hormone output like cortisol and adrenaline and testosterone and some of our other androgens. So it's a very comprehensive overview. But if maybe we're trying to understand thyroid hormones, then I typically will run that in blood. And with that, then I'm testing things like TSH, free thyroid hormone levels, thyroid antibodies, maybe even insulin, which is a pancreatic hormone. So it just depends on someone's symptoms and again, what they're trying to gather from that information or what we're trying to gather. If someone has any GI symptoms, then typically if it's things like constipation, bloating, diarrhea, which are very common that I see in women, or maybe it's something that's connected to the gut, like they're having skin issues, and we know that the gut has a very big impact on the skin, then I'll probably do a stool sample, and typically I'll use something called a GI map, and that's a just specific type of stool sample where it's looking at microbial imbalances. Do we have fungal overgrowth? Is there bacteria that are overgrown in the gut? How are we digesting and absorbing? Do we have inflammation or food sensitivities, things of that sort? And it's just a really comprehensive overview of everything that's going on in the digestive system. So I would say that those are typically my 3 starting points is, thyroid and insulin in the blood, reproductive hormones typically in the urine, and then the GI map through the stool for the gut.
No, I just totally nerded out. I think that kind of information is so critical to being able to help someone, get to the root cause of why they're not feeling or functioning as well as they should. So I listened to a podcast not too long ago. I think it was Dr. Peter Attia. I'm not sure, but I think it was him.
He's my recent crush.
Oh, is he?
I love him.
Such a smart man, such a smart man. And he was talking about hormone replacement therapy, and I would love your take on that. And if I recall, and I'm pretty certain I'm going to get this right, it was a little while ago though, that he is a proponent for women of perimenopause and menopause going through that change. The hormone replacement is a good thing, especially for estrogen and progesterone. Now, he said for testosterone that the jury is kind of still out. He wasn't real definitive on whether or not he would, put a woman on testosterone if her testosterone was low, as opposed to estrogen and progesterone. And I do get, this is a very loaded question, a lot of women concerned about being put on something like estrogen. And you guys, she has a wonderful Instagram account. So stay tuned to the very end to learn what her Instagram account is. But you just recently talked about estrogen and how heart protective it is as well. So I just asked you about 5 questions all at once.
I remember them.
Okay. You can just kind of share your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So it's so controversial. And unfortunately, there was a lot of bad research that was done years ago that was called the Women's Health Initiative study. That really was where a lot of the scare for women came from, and when it relates to hormone replacement therapy. And that's because they were using equine estrogen. It's an estrogen that's used in horses, and it's not the same as the estrogen that's in the female body, right? So I will say that, if you can understand, you can decipher through that research study, you can really see where things were cherry picked and where the research is so wrong. For any woman that might be fearful of hormone replacement therapy, that's a good place to start. Now, I do support hormone replacement therapy for women because once you've gone through those reproductive years, you're not making those hormones. So, when we're talking about someone that's, maybe age 15 or whenever you have menarche, your first period, all the way up until, maybe like early 40s, some women, it's even late 30s, then we can really work with the hormones you have. And we can typically kind of balance those types of hormones just by understanding why they're imbalanced. But once you start to go through that perimenopausal period, which can be anywhere from 8 to 10 years, most women hit it on average at age 42, but I've seen women hit perimenopause even earlier than that. You're starting to enter into a position where you've got a lot higher estrogen levels happening and progesterone becomes almost non-existent. And there's no real way to be able to bring that back. It's like an actual physiological thing for the body to stop making it as much, right? So the only way to then get the benefits that progesterone is providing is to replace it with bioidentical hormones that are going to help you function the same way as if it was there. And the issue lies in that if you don't replace these hormones, as you alluded to, there's so many benefits and protective things that these hormones are having on the body. So I talked about recently for Valentine's Day, the role of estrogen in the heart. the heart, estrogen is incredibly heart protective. And not only does it help prevent atherosclerosis and prevent heart attacks, it's also really important for just helping with blood pressure control as well. Estrogen helps with our cognitive function and helping prevent brain decline. It helps with, preventing vaginal dryness so that, you're still able to have pretty good sex life and have good libido. It's also going to help with bone protection to prevent things like osteoporosis, right? So if we're not replacing that estrogen, you're living half of your life without any of it there. Of course, we're going to start to run into some issues there. I've seen a lot of women that are in their, 70s that are starting to deal with issues in their cholesterol levels, their blood sugar levels, diabetes. And a lot of that's because they no longer have that estrogen on board to be able to help with removing that cholesterol through the body, with helping balance that blood sugar. And so you can only do so much within your diet and lifestyle. At some point, you're running this uphill battle with your hormones. And the only way to be able to really improve things is to then replace it through hormone replacement therapy.
I love that. So what are your thoughts on testosterone?
Yeah. So, progesterone, testosterone, really you want to replace all of them together, especially if there is deficiency in any of those areas. Now, the reason why testosterone isn't as needed, I guess, if you want to say, in those postmenopausal years is that you are still going to make testosterone because there's a good chunk of your androgens, which is just the class of hormones that testosterone falls within, that come from your adrenal glands. So what happens is that once you've had that last period, your ovaries no longer are making a lot of those hormones. Now the adrenal glands, which are these little glands that are on top of your kidneys, are actually responsible for making a little bit of estrogen, a little bit of progesterone. It's not very much, but it's a little bit. And that's coming from the adrenal glands. But all along, even when you were, 15, 20 years old, your adrenal glands have been making testosterone. They've been making androgens. And one of the things that happens, and a lot of the reasons why women in the menopausal years start to deal with body fat distribution changes, so they start to store a lot more fat in the abdominal region versus the hips. And also dealing with like hair growth on the face. Sometimes you'll see like whiskers or, abnormal hair growth happen, which is we call hirsutism. That's because there's a lot more of these androgens that are circulating once you've stopped having a normal menstrual cycle. And that's just a normal thing that happens. So long winded answer to your question, but a lot of women don't need testosterone replacement because their adrenals are still making enough of it, and only a small proportion of women actually need it.
That is so great to hear. And I had heard that, the all-cause mortality when you actually use hormone replacement therapy later on, that women, it shows that you live longer, and I don't know statistically how much longer, but it's a good thing, so check with your qualified dietitian or your doctor and talk about that stuff, and don't fear it because it is something that people fear because they hear that all they hear is estrogen is bad and estrogen is not bad. Yeah. I don't know if I read this a long time ago or if I thought of it myself, but I feel like when we're done with our reproductive years, Mother Nature is done with you, and so our bodies just start to decline at that point. But there are so many things that you can do besides diet and health and, healthy relationships and stuff, but stuff like the hormone, the bioidentical and the natural hormone replacement that you can do to help you still feel like you're thriving. Because once you hit that stage, Mother Nature's like, well, you can't reproduce anymore. You're no good to us. And so we do start to decline, but use science, and use the education out there to keep you feeling your best as you do reach that. I'm 49 years old, and I'm pretty sure I'm just starting perimenopause, which, I don't know if that's late or if that's normal. So far, so good. It's not, I don't notice it except for my periods are a little wonky. So fingers crossed that everything still goes smoothly. But it brings me, I'm just fascinated with nutrition, as I know you are too. So can you share with how food, can affect the body as a whole, but also specifically your hormones? And I loved how you said that you can't just go to Google and find a specific food that's, good for your estrogen levels or, good for your testosterone and expect to eat a ton of that certain food. And then all of a sudden, be 100% again. Just kind of share the science that you found on food and hormones and overall health.
Yeah. I think that hormones and eating for hormones can be really complex. And sometimes we try to oversimplify things too much. And unfortunately, we don't see any impact happen when we do that. Right. And so I always like to stress that, it's first and foremost using food as medicine. So there's particular compounds that are in foods that can help shift hormonal components, or maybe that provide vitamins and minerals that help with a specific hormone's production. Like, for example, thyroid hormones are made off of tyrosine, which is an amino acid that comes from proteins you eat, and that's combined with iodine, which is a mineral that's found in a lot of sea vegetables and seafood. And so, for example, with the thyroid, if you don't have enough iodine or tyrosine in the diet, of course, we're not going to make as much of those thyroid hormones, right? So the foods we eat does play a really big role in that hormone production. But really, we want to think about functional eating patterns. So we want to think about more so, how are you eating throughout the day? How often are you eating? What does that composition of that meal look like when you're eating based off of your hormonal profile? And that's where it's going to differ for each woman, right? And so the way that I like to think about it when we're talking about like premenopausal years versus that perimenopausal or postmenopausal years is, when we're in those premenopausal years, you can eat a certain way to be able to shift those hormonal patterns, right? Mm-hmm. When you're in the perimenopausal and postmenopausal years, you're not going to see that eating shift those patterns of your hormones as much. But instead, what we want to change the focus to is that there are processes in the body, there's hormones and metabolic processes that are changing, and those are going to impact how you should eat. So I know that kind of feels confusing, right? But it's like attacking things from two different angles. Premenopausal, we're addressing the hormones from a food approach, right? Perimenopausal, postmenopausal, we're saying, okay, what are these processes that have changed? How do we need to adjust the way that I eat to be able to work with my body better, right? So like, for example, in the perimenopausal years, we know that, there are some impacts that are happening within blood sugar control because estrogen levels are starting to drop into the, postmenopausal years. And so with that, maybe we want to focus a little bit more on, when you're eating, how we're supporting that blood sugar control to be able to help balance or help support those lower estrogen levels that are happening.
I love that. I love that so much. And I'm sitting here, obviously food is a big part of everything on how we look and feel. Can you share with your audience general guidelines? I know that it's very individual for each person, depending on, where they are in life and their health at that point, but kind of general guidelines that you give people when it comes to like creating a lifestyle. Like, how many meals do you eat? Do you believe in, are you okay with eating late at night? Are you okay with skipping breakfast? What are your kind of general rules for helping people establish a healthy lifestyle eating wise? Are you ready to learn the secret behind how I continue to be so healthy? Well, it all comes down to science. If you've been listening to my show for a while now, you may have heard me mention something called the MAID diet. Yes, that's right, because I'm so passionate about how learning about the effects that nutrition has on the human body, I always seek to learn as much as I can and apply that knowledge. One of my best learning tools has been self-experimentation. And now in my late 40s, I have to say, I've done a pretty good job. It's hard to find trustworthy, even accurate information in this country. Between the influence of big corporations with monetary agendas, the nutrition labels designed to deceive, and downright misleading information that you were taught in school, navigating food and nutrition with your optimum health in mind can be quite challenging. Take the food pyramid, for example. In an ideal world, I'm sure we would all love to eat pasta and baguettes for every meal. But that's simply not what's best for our bodies, our health, and our longevity. Now, I spent years developing the MAID diet in a way that I wish someone had taught me, and I break it all down in my MAID diet course. People are always asking me what I eat, so we start there. What I eat in a day and which foods are the most beneficial. So think something in between the Mediterranean and the paleo diet. It's a lifestyle plan that incorporates moderate protein, adequate fat, decreased carbs, and an introduction to intermittent fasting. But please, I want you to keep in mind, just because I say decrease carbs, I don't mean decrease carbs in what your body needs. I just mean decrease carbs in what the standard American diet has become. You still get plenty of quality carbohydrates, just not in the mass amounts we have been eating to get us into such an unhealthy state. And of course, we're going to talk about what foods to avoid because that's just as important. We even talk about how to eat healthy on the go because let's face it, we're busy and that's just life. And then there's intermittent fasting. I share all of my favorite tips and tricks, and a lot of science are along the way. I could not say enough good things about intermittent fasting, and I'm honestly so surprised more people are doing it. You'll also learn how I've learned to balance my hormones and feel my best because so many women struggle with this. And lastly, we cover the mindset behind making a change because we all know that your mindset is the key to your success in anything that you do. So if you are struggling with diet in terms of feeling your best or you are ready to take your health to the next level, I strongly recommend you check out this course. Now, the course is structured in 5 modules, 16 lessons, and a whole lot of research to back everything up. So I want you to visit my website, themadediet.com or melissamade.com, and you will see a tab for the course. Click on that to get access today and learn why you should be eating this way too.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about the premenopausal years, I'm pretty adamant that a woman needs to eat within the first 1 to 2 hours upon waking, because if not, then we're seeing a big cortisol response happen, and that's going to lower progesterone levels, which are really important to ovulation and healthy reproductive system. So, definitely trying to have breakfast within that first 1 to 2 hours of waking. I think that the composition of that meal is really important. I see a lot of women I work with who maybe don't have very much protein in the earlier part of the day, and a lot of it's at lunch and dinner. But I'm really big on spreading that protein out evenly throughout multiple meals, which typically ends up being around like 3 meals and then 1 snack that does have the same amount of protein in it, because protein is very supportive of our insulin levels. And it also helps with preserving lean body mass, and lean body mass helps protect our metabolism. The more muscle we have, the more calories that we burn at rest, the more we're able to dispose or essentially get rid of sugar and carbohydrate when we eat it. So that protein is functioning for a lot of different purposes there, right? And then around that, I think it's really important that we're not eating meals that are, just one predominant macronutrient, that these meals are mixed in terms of what they're composed of, So we've got our protein source, we have multiple different vegetables, and that those are the those are the base of the meal, that those are really that 50% of what that meal consists of, and that there's variety within those, because those different vegetables are really where we see food as medicine when it comes to hormones. They're going to provide a lot of different vitamins and enzymes in them that are helping shift how we make and how we metabolize different hormones. So we want to make sure that we've got diversity of those different vegetables so that we're getting all of these vitamins and enzymes to be able to help with those processes, right? Depending on what hormone we're trying to impact, will kind of dictate like how much starch someone should be eating in their diet or how much fruit they should be eating, right? But I do think that most women are going to need to have some quantity of that at each meal, because it's going to at least give us a little bit of a blood sugar response, so that you're able to then be satiated for a couple of hours and create stable blood sugar. We don't want to have like big highs and lows happening within your sugar responses throughout the day. But if we don't have any carbohydrates, some women will deal with like really chronically low blood sugar. And when our blood sugar is really low, that creates a stress hormone response in the body. So really the goal of like your reproductive years eating is it's like telling the body that this is a safe place to reproduce. So like everything we're doing is it's like we're giving the body these signals through the way that you're eating, the frequency at which you're eating. If that ends up to where you end up eating a couple hours before bed, I don't think that that's really that big of an issue. But typically I'm going to recommend, having that first meal within the first 2 hours of rising, and then trying to spread things out about 4 hours from there so that we're able to really maximize that blood sugar and, your digestive processes as well. Whereas when you start to look in like the postmenopausal years, things start to shift, and sometimes there's, like I said, with the estrogen dropping, there tends to be issues with blood sugar control. And maybe we do need to use some fasting to be able to help facilitate that. And that's, of course, going to be dependent off the woman. We have to be mindful that a lot of women that are in that age bracket in the 40s and 50s are also under a lot of stress. I see a lot of women in that age bracket that are, running businesses, they're working a lot, they're, handling, raising kids, and they're trying to manage their health. And so fasting maybe is too much of a stressor. Maybe it's actually adding more cortisol to an already really high cortisol environment, but it can be helpful, and I don't see it as being as harmful during those years as it can be during the reproductive years. But really everything after that is pretty similar. There's just some differences within specific food sources that we would use that are helping be able to provide different vitamins and different enzymes for those different hormonal changes that we're trying to support.
Ah, so 50 million questions in my head. And you might have saw me. I was just smiling ear to ear. I am a huge proponent of vegetables. And Lauren, gonna get a little controversial here. Can you tell me your thoughts on the information that's being put out there that vegetables are out to kill you or that vegetables aren't good for you? I mean, can you once and for all kind of set that to rest? That they're such an important part of your diet?
There's always going to be something that people are trying to attack and say, this is the culprit, this is the problem, right? And if you sort through any of the research, you can find research, you can cherry pick research to say, protein's bad for you, or fat's bad for you, carbs are bad for you, but you're never going to find anything that says vegetables are bad for you. It's just very far and few between, unless you really are looking for something specific, like, oh, can you tell me about the lectins in tomatoes? And you're, searching on PubMed for lectins in tomatoes, and then you're going to find something that says, oh, actually lectins can actually be good for you too. So it can be a bit controversial, but I think that if you study any of the cultures that are some of the healthiest, that have the lowest risk of diseases, that have lived to be the longest, they're eating a predominantly vegetable-based diet. And there's a lot of different types of vegetables in there. They're not going to Whole Foods and getting a bag of pre-chopped broccoli and eating that for every meal. They're growing broccoli in season in their garden along with 10 other vegetables and using all of those in one meal to be able to create flavor and be able to incorporate those different fibers.
Yeah, for sure. And you're a big proponent of, kind of our circadian rhythm as well, right? I mean, that your hormones, which I'm just barely starting to learn about, like the muscle protein synthesis being more predominant and stuff in the morning versus in the evening, which is probably why you say to eat more protein in the morning. Yeah. Can you share the correlation between our natural circadian rhythm and our hormones?
Yeah. So circadian rhythm is essentially a term for like your body's internal clocks, right? That align with the sun and the moon. So, we have a circadian clock and everything is essentially on this clock, all of our processes. And we also have something that's called our infradian rhythm. And these are like rhythms that are within our body that happen cyclically. And one of those is the menstrual cycle. So circadian rhythm is like within a day, infradian rhythm would be like within a month, right? So it's a different type of rhythm, but the menstrual cycle is a rhythm, right? And the circadian rhythm is so important because we know that there's certain hours and there's certain times of day that things are happening at a greater degree. So for example, the pineal gland, which is a gland that's located right behind your eye, is really the master regulator of this. The pineal gland has like two functions: to be able to help you see and be able to, take light in, and then also to regulate our circadian rhythm. And when that pineal gland gets exposed to light in the morning, that's when all of these processes turn on. That's when your digestive processes, your metabolic processes, hormonal processes, it's like turning, the lights on in your office when you enter in the morning, right? Like all of these processes are flipping on. And then that's what really starts this like 12-hour clock, to where now we're on the opposite end of the day, where now it should be getting dark. And now these processes are starting to down regulate. And now our body's really starting to go into more of like a repair mode, right? And we see that even with like, if anyone that's listening is into skincare, like you've probably seen that there's like different skincare you use in the morning to protect your skin than there is in the evening time to be able to heal your skin, right? It's the same thing that's happening in our body. And when it comes to digestion and hormones, is that the sun and the moon is really regulating how these different processes work.
Ironically, being here in Mexico, Lauren is in San Diego, where we were both laying out in the sun earlier before this together, but not together. Right now, because there's a new moon and I'm new to this area and seeing how this whole, the demographic work, there's a new moon. And so the tide is really freaking low. I mean, it's mind blowing to me how low the tide is, and we had a real estate agent over last night for dinner and he's like, yeah, it's because of the new moon. That's just proof of how how much pull and how crazy we are, the earth as humans, animals are in sync with the moon and the sun, like you said, and that circadian rhythm. If you live by an ocean, you see that. It's absolutely mind-blowing how much the moon and the sun change the way that even just the height of the water, it's dramatic. So just a side note that if you ever like, no, that sounds kind of wonky to me, you know, a whole, it's not. Come visit, let me show you the huge range of the way the ocean changes. So I'm sitting here and having the pleasure of being on a Zoom with you. And I know that you were a cheerleader and a gymnast and you've worked with Olympians, and I'm watching your beautiful shoulder muscles pop every time you move your arms. So can we talk a little bit about, you know, health, diet, you know, and strength training, and your thoughts on strength training and any kind of insights you can give on my following when it comes to maybe the hormones, the gut health, the diet, and how, if you're really working to build that muscle to retain it as you get older, you know, what are some of the things that you can do specifically to really give you that edge?
Yeah. I'm in love with muscle for women, honestly. I think it's such an underrated tool that we have in our toolbox that so many women aren't tapping into. And if they just knew the power of how that was going to impact them, not physically, but I mean, obviously physically is part of it, but really how it's impacting you physiologically, it's incredible, right? And, you know, I grew up, you know, as a gymnast, so obviously there's quite a bit of different strength training and things that you're doing. And then I grew up, my dad teaching me how to lift weights when I was 8 years old, going to the gym. And so, you know, I've been lifting weights since I was really young. So I have a little bit of like a bias towards it because it's something I was just like a culture that I was raised in, right? Where it was like, my dad always telling me that, you know, it's okay for women to be muscular and to be strong, right? And like growing up in that, it's like, okay, like I didn't know anything different, right? But then when I started to like really dive into like, is this something that's beneficial? Like when I'm starting to dive into the hormone research, like, is this actually beneficial for us or is this harmful, right? And I started to really learn about how there's so many hormonal responses that are actually happening when we resistance train. I mean, really with exercise in general, but you're getting the biggest responses during resistance training. And those hormonal responses actually can be beneficial to your hormones. So, you know, we're going to see things like growth hormone response when we resistance train. And, you know, we're going to see an increase in insulin sensitivity. And these things impact how we then metabolize food an hour later, 24 hours later, sometimes even 48 hours later. And so not only from like a metabolism standpoint, are you going to see your body being able to, you know, be more receptive to eating more carbohydrates and being able to have a quicker moving metabolism, but you're also going to see improvements to testosterone levels and to your hormonal balance and all of your sex hormones too, right? And so, you know, I think that it's important that we're also understanding those, like those types of workouts are a stressor on the body, and they're a good stressor because they're tearing down muscle tissue, and we need that in order to be able to see an adaptation happen. But you know, sometimes I see women where they're doing a little bit too much, and I think like I was in that camp at one point too, until I met my now husband, and he's a performance coach, and you know, he looked at kind of what I was doing, and he was like, my nickname that a lot of people call me is Lo. And he's like, Lo, you are doing too much. He's like, this is like too much of a good thing at this point, right? Where I was like lifting really heavy 5 days a week, and I was just breaking down my body. And I was like, but I don't really feel like I'm working out that much. I'm working out for an hour, hour and a half. You know, I didn't really feel like that much. And he's like, you have to take it into the context of everything else that's going on, right? Like you're working 12-hour days, and like, how much are you eating on a daily basis, right? Like, what does your stress level look like? How much are you sleeping? All of these things. And at first I was so resistant to make changes because I was like, no, like, you know, I love this. It's so fun. And, you know, I get the thrill out of it. But then I started to, and hormonally things started to improve even beyond that. And I really saw that firsthand in my own life, how just creating the right dose of that, right? It's like, you don't need to, you want a resistance train, but we want to create the right dose. And that dose being so important to how the whole hormonal response happens in the rest of the body.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw you on Reformer, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Something
Yeah.
that you really enjoy doing?
Yeah, so I just started to get into Legree Pilates, which is more of like a strength-based form of Pilates. And I got certified back in December because I just wanted to understand the science of it a little bit more. And I only do it about like 2 days per week as just like a way to still get some of the strength stimulus, but in a little bit of a different way that's a little bit lower impact on the body. So I do that and then, lift, like today I lifted with a barbell and dumbbells, so it just kind of depends. But yeah, I've really, kind of tailored it to where now it's not an everyday thing. And I've found like that sweet spot where it's like I'm getting all the benefits hormonally without any of those drawbacks, right?
Absolutely. So it must be interesting. Like my husband is a mechanic by trade. So I always have the fanciest, best running cars on the planet because that's what my husband does. It's his passion. Your husband is a performance coach. So that's
Yeah.
obviously his passion as well. Anything that you've learned from him, specifically besides overdoing the strength training that, you can share with the audience that you found very valuable?
Oh my gosh, so much. He's so smart. I actually have like a few podcast episodes with him because he's
Oh,
like the deep science on all of the performance things. And then I'm like deep into the science on hormones. And so we just like combine the two and just nerd out. I always think that if someone had like a camera on the wall, they'd be like, wow, you guys, this is really all you talk about, huh? No, we talk about other things too, but we just love it. But yeah, I mean, that was, huge in terms of like the structure of things. Also too, I used to, so like growing up at cheer and gymnastics, there was also a good amount of like aerobic conditioning that we would do. And so I would run quite a bit too. I was probably running, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 miles per week. So I wasn't like, I wouldn't call myself like a runner by any means, but like, I was going on like a couple mile long runs a few times a week. And one of the things that he taught me about is a philosophy that's called concurrent training. And it's basically where you kind of dilute stimuli if you do endurance training on the same workout as resistance training. And I was doing that wrong where I was, saying, oh, I'm going to go work out on Monday and I'm going to go on a 3 mile run and then I'm going to go lift after, or, I was just mapping it all out wrong. And so he, kind of had me at first just adjust it to where I was doing resistance training on one day and then the like aerobic workout on the next day, like a run, and then resistance training the day after and kind of mapping things out that way. And then eventually I just said, you know what? I kind of done with this whole endurance training thing. I don't really see the benefit of it happening in my labs anymore. I don't see it. I don't see the benefit of what it's doing to my body physically anymore. And for so long, I was convinced that like running was having such a big impact on the way that my body was functioning or the way that it looked externally. But then once I finally like parted ways with it, I was like, no, it's actually the strength training that's having the biggest impact on things. So I'm going to invest my time in this and I'm going to spend less time working out now and like get that time back in my life. Right.
I love that. That's great advice. Maybe have him on the podcast at some point in time.
Yeah.
I would love your take on calories in, calories out, which, there's obviously science behind it. You can't have 5,000 calories a day and no matter what you eat and expect to lose weight or to maintain your weight. That's obviously going to put you in a surplus and you will gain weight. But I know that you say it's so much more than just counting the calories, to be more mindful of what you're eating. And we did talk about the importance of the healthy fats and the proteins and the vegetables, but anything else on top of that that you can share so people don't. I think that's the first thing, if it fits your macros, it's the first thing they think of is, people are telling me to eat more protein. They're telling me to watch my sugar. So I'm just going to count calories. And maybe even count macros, which I think counting macros is better than just counting calories, but to give people I guess, a big sigh of relief that you don't have to live next to a food scale or look at the nutritional calories, especially since they can be up to 20% wrong, and we try so hard to think calories are the end all be all when they're really not.
I know. And it's so hard to help people understand that because I just think that even still, they're still pressed so much as such an important component. And like you said, they do matter to some extent, but I'll just share with my own personal story with the audience too, because I think that helps you kind of understand. When I first became a dietitian and I was like just starting to learn about hormones and starting to do all of this extra training and research and things, I was counting calories. I was counting macros because that's what I learned in school that you're supposed to do, right? Of course, we're also learning about other things beyond that, but that seemed to be a really huge component to understand how much was I eating on a daily basis. And then I started to deal with a lot of things like you mentioned in my bio. I was starting to deal with cystic acne and really bad digestive issues. I had gained 30 pounds. I have a very small frame. That was really concerning. Where is all this coming from? I've been almost the same weight my entire life, right? And I would check my little macros, and every day I'm like, nope, these are spot on. There's no discrepancy that's happening. What is going on? This just doesn't add up. And I wasted months trying to continue to adjust these macros, thinking that that was going to get me out of these symptoms I was having, out of this like metabolic like turmoil, if you will, right? And that was when I started on my hormone journey, because I realized that you can't out macro a hormone imbalance, because at the end of the day, if you've got a hormone imbalance going on, that's always going to take precedent in terms of how your body's responding to how you metabolize food, right? And so it wasn't until I shifted my emphasis to how can I eat and exercise to heal my hormones that my body composition started to actually go back to where it was prior. And a lot of those symptoms started to resolve as well. So that was my own personal journey with it. And that moved me so much that I decided, I'm not going to emphasize macros and calories so much in my practice with women, because it's really not that important. I'm more so just going to teach them how you should be eating throughout the day and roughly about what that looks like in terms of quantities. And what I found over the years since making that adjustment is that so many women don't want to count calories. They just think that they have to. Like you don't want to be like pulling out your phone when you're at a restaurant or when you're trying to like go eat something with your kids. You just feel the pressure that you have to do that. And so if we can actually find a strategy that works for you better, that doesn't give you that pressure and like ruin food for you, why wouldn't we take that approach? Like there's just so much wasted energy that I think is happening around using macros and calories. So that's kind of like the more psychological aspect of it. But in terms of the science behind it, as you mentioned, there's so much discrepancy to nutrition labels, right? And that's why if you look at a nutrition label, sometimes you'll see that it says 200 calories, but if you add up the macros, they don't even add up to 200, right? Or companies can round up and round down in terms of how much they show you. So, they have a big wiggle room in terms of that range of how much they have to actually depict on the nutrition facts. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, your hormones and your digestive system are where those calories are actually going to be metabolized. So there's research that shows that if you take the stool of a lean mouse and you put it in an obese mouse, that obese mouse becomes lean and vice versa. Right. So we know that, that the digestive system, those microbes in the gut are so responsible to how we extract calories and how we metabolize those calories. It's like, why are we wasting so much energy on just focusing on how many almonds you had when your digestive system has a different plan for how those almonds are going to impact you, right?
Yes. So with this podcast, there's always sound bites that we do. And I am hoping, I'm going to make sure that what you just said is one of the sound bites, because that so many women had to have just gone, okay, that has just got to be wonderful for them to hear, because, that's always the very first step in people thinking to get healthy is to start counting calories. And I love what you said about that. I want to shift just a little bit. Your thoughts on supplementation, things like with all the testing that you do, vitamin D deficient, magnesium deficient, you see that they're not, whether it's an upper GI issue or anything, but they're not, breaking down their protein. And what are your thoughts on supplementation for people? I mean, do you always first and foremost go for food and diet, or if you notice a deficiency, do you start them on something, pretty quickly to help them feel better faster while you also work on the diet?
Yeah. So I always use supplementation therapeutically based off of what we find in labs, right? So sometimes you can guess what someone needs based off of symptoms, but if we have labs, why not use them so that we know the exact dosages, how long, is this a deficiency that's maybe dependent off of something else, right? So a lot of times, for example, someone might have vitamin D deficiency, but it's because they have a magnesium deficiency. So maybe it's not just supplementing them with vitamin D, we also need to make sure their magnesium levels are up to par, right? So I see see them really being a great therapeutic tool. I think that it's really important that when people are buying supplements, that they're purchasing from quality brands that not only have quality in the supplements in terms of, what's actually in there, but that the dosage is also proper, because there's a lot of companies that are out there that are just targeting you from a marketing perspective. And when I look at the dosages and compare that to the research, it's 1/5 of what the research says is going to be effective. And unfortunate thing for the consumer is that you don't know that. You're just trusting this company that there's great reviews and that, they have this great research. So keep that in mind that, anytime you're buying a supplement, you have to make sure that you're doing a little bit more research beyond that for how much you should be using based off of what's going on. But I think that it depends as well on what you're using the supplements for. So for example, sometimes I use vitamins with clients I work with. Other times I use herbs, or I use nutraceuticals that are a little bit different. And typically when I'm using herbs or nutraceuticals, we're using those for treatment. So if we see, imbalances in the gut, there's candida, there's, low digestive enzyme function, there's inflammation going on in the gut. I might have someone use something for 1 month or 2 months until we get into that next phase. And then we take that supplement out. And then now we move on to the next round of supplements. But the goal is that they're not having to stay on this whole list of supplements for the entirety of their life. That's really not necessary, nor is it beneficial, right? Whereas something like a micronutrient deficiency, that might be something you need a little bit more as baseline support. I was actually so surprised. I saw a client the other day. We did a really comprehensive micronutrient panel on her. She just had a baby 2 months ago, and she had been taking her prenatal, a really good quality prenatal at the full dosage. She had also been supplementing with beef liver capsules, which also are almost like a prenatal. They're so dense in like B vitamins and retinol and things. And then she was also taking fish oil and vitamin D, and she was so depleted, and she's so depleted and so many vitamins still. This is her third baby in 6 years. So, we know that it takes a while for micronutrient status to replenish itself after labor, because you're giving this baby so much of your nutrients, right? But it was just really crazy to see, because I've never actually tested someone's micronutrient panel that close to labor, right? To see just how deficient she was and how much support she still needed. And that even just a prenatal wasn't even scratching the surface of what her needs were in terms of her deficiencies.
That's cool. That's so cool for someone to get such individualized care, which I think is fantastic. So I'm out of questions for you, believe it or not. I would, would love to work one-on-one with you. I think, which I said in the introduction, that you do all the science back, but you can just tell you have that empathetic nature. And even just that you mentioned beef liver. You said beef liver, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a superfood. And I love how rounded you are, some people fasting is really good for, others it may not be good for. Supplementing nutraceuticals might be good for some people, not necessary for other people. Obviously, you're okay with the beef side of things. You know the importance of vegetables. So you take that very individualized approach with people, which when I saw in your little stats, I was pretty impressed with some of them, because you have such a knack for helping people one-on-one and keeping them and taking them through the whole journey to their complete wellness, which I think is really stinking cool that you do that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's really a passion of mine, and something that I really feel like I have a gift for to be able to help people. And I think it's so important too that, unfortunately with our medical system, a lot of times, when you go to the doctor, they kind of just treat you as like labs, right? And they just treat to the labs, and they don't treat to the person. They don't treat to the individual based off your lifestyle or, you and what you need. And, when I'm working with clients, like I have some clients where, maybe we're working on some body image and food relationship things along with all of this like higher level components we're doing within the lab testing. And then other clients where that's not even something we talk about, right? But it looks so different for everyone, because everyone needs something different in order to get to that place of optimal health.
For sure. And I can hear them, and you're so cute. I saw you mute yourself, but we talked beforehand. It least it's not my husband this time. I think it's great that real life happens.
Yeah, I apologize. I think my husband must have stepped out. And so now we have a new puppy. She's like 12 weeks old and she just gets so anxious when she's by herself. So I think she's freaking out a little bit that she's left alone.
She's ready for mama. So I will close this podcast, but can you share with everybody where they can find you, all your, like your social media outlets, your website, and if they want more information on working with you, where they would go?
Yeah. So my practice is called Functional Fueling Nutrition. Our website is functionalfueling.com. And all of the information on how to work together is there. We have both a group program called Strength and Hormones and also the one-on-one coaching, which is where we do lab testing. My Instagram handle and TikTok are @nutritionwithlo. And I also have a podcast. It's called the Strength and Hormones Podcast, where I bring in different experts that help women understand their hormones and how to support their body. So those are all the places to learn more. And, if anyone has any questions, feel free to just send me a message over on Instagram. I'd love to meet you and I'd love to answer any questions for you.
Yes, I really encourage you guys to follow her. That's where I found her. Me, I'm not quite into TikTok yet. I'm trying. I've got a whole 700 followers. I'm killing it over there.
Better than me, trust me. I'm not great over there either. It's just, I'm trying, we try to some degree.
It's hard to be an empathetic nutritional person on social media, because you either got to be really funny or really controversial. And I'm not either of those. So definitely. I really enjoyed this and glad I got the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. And thank you so much for giving us your time. And I wish you really well with the new puppy and enjoying that sun out there.
Thank you. You too, Melissa. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And as always, you guys, I want you to wake up feeling prepared and I want you to go to bed feeling proud. Have a great day. Wow, we've reached the end. But before I leave you, I'd love to hear from you. After all, it's not every day that someone reaches out and asks for your opinion. And to me, your opinion does matter. So please share this episode with anyone that you think needs to hear this message. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. My name is Melissa McAllister. And until next time, thank you for being your own health advocate.